it going? My name's Joe, and today I want to show you my latest custom action figure, Sandman. The Sandman is one of Spider-Man's oldest villains. Made his first appearance all the way back in 1963 in The Amazing Spider-Man number 4. He was created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. And Sandman was involved in an accident which basically turned his body into sand, and he can use his powers to manipulate his body. A lot of times he turns his fists into weapons to use against Spider-Man. So this is going to be a work in progress type video. I worked on the figure a little bit, I filmed it, I worked on the figure a little bit more, I filmed that, and I've edited them all together so you can see from start to finish the process of customizing this Sandman action figure. So let's get started. Alright, so here's my custom Sandman figure in its very early stages. I used a WWE figure by Mattel as the base body. I don't know who this guy is. It's McMahon something. Not into wrestling at all, but a lot of times I use Mattel figures for customs because the articulation's pretty good. Unfortunately, they're out of scale to fit in with a lot of Legends figures, but for Sandman, I think that this scale will work really well. And the reason I chose him was because he has basically a shirtless chest and long pants. So the first thing I did was remove his arms. I soaked the figure in some scalding hot water that I microwaved, removed his arms, and then I worked on cracking this torso. And this was a real pain in the ass, and I boogered it up pretty badly trying to get this torso apart. I used an X-Acto knife. I tried to cut along this seam right here. This is 2 parts. It was taking a long time. I got a screwdriver and some other sharp tools, and I wasn't having much luck. Finally, I got it cracked apart without totally destroying the inside of it. I left this pretty nasty gap on both sides here, and so what I'm going to do is, after I've got the parts back together, his shoulders and the sockets here, and back on the abdomen, then I'm going to fill this in with sculpting clay and smooth it out so that you can't tell it has a big nasty seam right there. So I took his torso apart so that I could sand along all the parts where it would rub up against other parts of the figure, all the moving parts. So I sanded along here, I sanded on the inside of his shoulders there, the sockets, and I sanded the shoulders down so that when I put the figure back together and have it all painted and everything, then when I move the joints around, the paint won't rub off. Alright, so there's the front of the torso with the shoulders back in, and just to give you an idea, I'm going to put him back together a little bit, and his shoulders might be a little loose. I'm thinking about putting a small piece of a paper towel or something in there before I glue the figure back together to maybe make those joints a little bit tighter. I haven't decided yet. But anyways, so then here's the back. I'm going to put that back on like this so you kind of get an idea of what it'll look like. Alright, so most Mattel figures have this really nasty looking swivel joint at the mid-thigh, and I really hate that. So what I did was I glued it in place, and then I used some Milliput sculpting clay to fill in that gap, and I might have to sand this down a little bit so you can't tell, but basically the reason I did that is just because I don't like that joint. I think it's really ugly and kind of useless. So I bought a few of the figures from the Sandman Build-A-Figure wave. I bought the Green Goblin, but the head was too big. The alternate heads were too big to fit on this body. Were way out of scale. And I bought the Shocker a long time ago. Actually, I got him as a gift for my wife, and I sold that Build-A-Figure leg on eBay. The only Build-A-Figure parts that I kept were the ones that came with this Spider-Man figure here, and they're the constructs or whatever. There's the brick or block, and then there's the spiked mace. And all I did was I heated up the wrestling figure's arms. I pulled out his hands. So with a little bit of hot water and some effort, I was able to squeeze those in there. And even though the pegs for these wrists are a lot smaller. So that's what it looked like before on this side. what I did here was I used some of that Milliput sculpting clay to make it look like his forearm is morphing into this spiked mace. And I'm going to paint this. But what I did was I sculpted over this carefully to retain the articulation. And it's not such a big deal with this mace, I don't think. I think that would look kind of weird, but still it's there if I decide I want to use it. I think it'll be more important with this giant block fist. So I'm going to do the same thing with this hand, or with that arm that I've done with this arm, and sculpt that to cover up that joint a little bit. And then finally, for the head, and I do know who this guy is. This is Undertaker. And I bought this figure several years ago to make a custom Bane action figure. And all I had left was the head from that figure. I pulled the hair off of it. I'm going to sculpt the cornrows like Sandman has right over this. And I really like the green eyes, I think especially it'll look good on my Sandman figure. So I'm not going to touch the eyes at all. And I really like that sneer a lot. I think that's going to look really good for a custom Sandman figure. And this WWE McMahon figure, whoever he is, has really, really nice ankle articulation. He's got a ball socket that fits into the his pant legs there. And he's got a really nice ankle rocker. And before I took the figure apart, he had really, really good ankle articulation. So I'm not going to paint him at all. I'm going to leave his boots completely alone. Alright, so there you have it. That's the first few steps of my custom Sandman figure. Alright, I got a lot accomplished yesterday on the Sandy here. I had to sand down some parts on his hips there because they were rubbing, and on the insides of his legs a little bit because they were rubbing. So I sanded those down, I painted them, and then I brushed on a little bit of super glue to protect the paint. And I did a pretty nice little dry brushing on the pant legs there. I used like 3 different shades of brown. I left his boots alone completely, and still has really, really nice articulation there. I really like that a lot. So when I was trying to crack the torso open, I made this waist swivel joint really, really loose. I couldn't figure out a way to crack the abdomen, and I couldn't figure out a way to tighten it up. So I just super glued it in place. It's not a huge deal to me whether or not he has a waist swivel. Anyways, I think the sides where I patched the big gaps in his torso there with the Milliput, I think that worked pretty well. It looks pretty seamless. Looks pretty nice and smooth. I painted this all dark green and then dry brushed it with a lighter green color. And then I'm using the same dark green paint to do the stripes on his shirt. And I've just gotten started doing that. Alright, so I need to finish painting the stripes on his torso. I'm waiting to put the arms on until I've done that. And then after I get that done, I'm going to brush a little super glue onto his shoulders here so that you don't get paint rub when you move the bicep swivel around. And I'm going to do the same thing to the top of his neck so that you don't get paint rub when you move the head back and forth. Alright, and so after I'm done with that, all I need to do is paint the belt black and put a little gold paint on his belt buckle there. Alright, so Sandman's arms are done also. What I did was I painted this. I painted his arms flesh tone, and the tops of his biceps there, I painted those to match his shirt. And same with the shirt there. Painted it dark green, dry brushed it with light green. Then I did the stripe there in the dark green again. And I think I did pretty well matching the paint and everything on these sand constructs with the parts that I sculpted. This is the second one that I sculpted, and I'm pretty happy with that. And these constructs, articulation still works really good. And there's the elbow joint. So I'm pretty happy with the way the arms turned out. Just like the shoulders, I brushed on a little bit of super glue there, and it's dry now, so that'll help protect the paint and prevent you from getting paint rub when you move the bicep swivels. Alright, so now all I have left to do is sculpt the cornrows on the top of Undertaker's head, repaint that, and then finish the paint detail on the torso there, and then he'll be finished up. Here's a 360-degree view of my new custom Sandman figure. I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. Alright, so the final steps for the Sandman figure, where I painted the stripes on his shirt, I painted his belt and his belt buckle, then the stripes on his shoulders, and I put the figure back together, and then finally I sculpted the cornrow hairdo on his head with milliput, and I used a toothpick to do the lines and the finer details, and then I painted it light brown and gave it a dark paint wash. I left his eyes and his mouth alone, painted around them very carefully with flesh tone, and then I painted the rest of the face to match the other flesh tone parts of the figure, and I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out. Alright, so Flint Marko, Sandman here, along with Harry and Norman Osborn, have the same style hairdo. It's this weird white guy cornrow thing, and I don't know what it's really supposed to be, but this is the way it looks in the comics. I tried to imitate it as well as I could. So aside from the waist joint that I had to glue in place and the swivel thigh joints, he's got the exact same articulation that the original figure had. He's got a ball socket head that has a lot of range of movement. You can get nice tilt action there. He can look up pretty far. He can look down a lot. And nice side to side. And like I said, you can get a lot of attitude, I think, with this articulation in the neck. I like that a lot. He's got ball socket shoulders with pretty decent range of motion. They're a little bit loose. The paper towel thing I tried to do in the torso didn't help very much. And these sand constructs are really, really heavy. So they kind of drag his arms down a little bit. But he's got bicep swivel and an elbow joint. And these sand constructs, they still swivel all the way around and pivot. He still retains his ab crunch joint. It goes further back than it goes forward, but it still works as much as I need it to. His hips have a really good range of motion. They go all the way up, pretty far back. They go out to the side, just like those other Mattel figures. They have this strange kind of joint. I think for characters that wear pants like this, I think it looks pretty nice and clean though. He's got double jointed knees that work really well. I didn't take the knees apart and sand on the inside of the joints because I was afraid that would make the joints too loose and he wouldn't be able to stand. And he still retains that really good ankle rocker with a pretty decent ankle pivot. It's a little hindered by the pant legs here, but his ankles have a lot of range of motion. Alright, here's my custom Sandman figure, next to some other Marvel Legends Spider-Man characters that are using pretty common buck bodies. There's the Marvel Legends Kraven, that's on the Capwolf body. There's the Chameleon figure, same body as Bruce Banner and Phil Coulson. There's Pizza Spidey, same buck body that they use for Iron Fist and Bobby Drake, Iceman. And then here's the Shocker on the Bucky Cap body. So if you're like me, you've probably got 100 Bucky Cap figures. And Sandman stands just a touch over 7 inches tall. I think that he's pretty good scale. He's usually depicted as being taller, a lot taller and bulkier than other characters, so I think this works pretty well for Sandman. Alright, so in case you're wondering, hey, why didn't you just buy the whole wave of the Sandman Build-A-Figure and build the official Hasbro Sandman figure? Save yourself the trouble. The reason is that I didn't want most of the figures in that wave. I genuinely wanted a Shocker because I didn't have a Shocker figure in my collection, and I genuinely wanted the Black Suit Spider-Man because I didn't have one of those in my collection either. I was on the fence about Green Goblin. I have another Green Goblin figure that I'm pretty happy with, so I wasn't really going to buy Green Goblin originally. I found him at Target for $12, and then after I sold the Build-A-Figure parts, the head was out of scale for my custom figure here. After I sold those parts, I ended up getting Green Goblin for basically like $5 or $6. So, you know, Camilla Khan, I'm just not really familiar with her. I've never seen that Spider-Man 2099 costume ever until these figures were announced. And then Spider UK, I think, is a cool character. I liked him in Edge of Spider-Verse, but yeah, I have to draw a line somewhere. I don't have, you know, unlimited money or display space for my figures, so even though he looked really cool and I liked the character, I just, you know, had to draw a line somewhere. And same with Jackal. You know, if I could get Jackal for $5 or $6, I would buy him, but otherwise just not super interested in him. I'm not real wild about the Build-A-Figure concept in general. The only two Build-A-Figures that I've completed are Odin and Jubilee, and I took a beating on the figures I didn't want, like trying to resell them. The White Suit Iron Fist and Sentry I didn't care about, and I lost money trying to resell the figures because I just bought them for the Build-A-Figure parts. And same thing with the Cyclops with the red and black costume. Like, nobody wants that figure. They just bought it for the Jubilee Build-A-Figure part. And I really just didn't care for the Sandman Build-A-Figure. All the parts that I had and sold on eBay had pretty lousy paint on them. I think the proportions were a little wonky on that Build-A-Figure. And the only really cool thing about it was the interchangeable arms. And I would like to have the big giant sand fist hands. I think that would be really cool. I think an individual who practices or who has talent with paint can do a lot better paint job on an action figure, a custom figure, than what you're going to get with a mass-produced factory figure. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this video and found it entertaining and informative. Maybe you'll be inspired to do your own custom action figure someday. I don't have any delusions of grandeur or anything. I understand I'm not the best customizer in the world by any means, but I really enjoy it. And I can look back at my collection and see other customized figures that I've done and see where I've improved. Also, you know, some of my favorite things in my collection are figures that I've customized or repainted. So if you've never done it before, you know, maybe start with a small, simple project or a repaint, or you know, buy an inexpensive figure and use that as a base body for your first custom and work your way up to it. Stay tuned to this channel because later this month I'm going to do an overview of my entire Spider-Man action figure collection in anticipation of Spider-Man Homecoming coming out next month. I'm really excited about that, and looking forward to seeing the movie. Hopefully it's as good as Guardians and Wonder Woman has been. So anyways, I'll talk to you later. Take care. Bye.